They were on their own, and most of them managed to do it beautifully. So we didn't treat them like children. We treated them like, you know, like professionals, like what they knew what to do, and they did. I mean, Dexter, whom I absolutely loved, Dexter Gordon. He was a marvelous person, but he was so good, you know, as you know when you've seen it. He was a great talker, and his thing was, boom, you know, perfect. And Errol Garner was the most interesting, because with Errol, you don't tell him anything about what to do, and you don't tell him anything about what to play. But the most remarkable thing, I mean, most of the guys, you set up a program, they would think about what to do and what order to do it, and they would tell us what they wanted to do, and we would discuss it with them and say. With Errol, we told him, you know, how much time he had, and we told him that, you know, do anything you want to do, but just remember the time. What did he say? He said, "I gotcha." He said, "I gotcha." He sat down. He had Jose Mangual. He had McCarthy was the bassist, and I forget who the drummer was. It may have been Bill English. It was with him for a while. Anyway, he started out, and he played wonderfully, and he segued, you know, that he played seamlessly, didn't really stop a little for applause. We had an audience, we had a live audience. His timing was so good that he wound up right like that, on the dime. He had something like 28 minutes, boom, just like that. It was almost that Bob and I looked at each other, we could hardly believe it, you know, we almost fell around, you know. I mean, it was so perfect, and what he played was, as Errol, was outstanding. I mean, he was a genius. He was an absolute original, totally himself, and flawless in what he was doing. And he was somebody who could engage an audience without saying a word. A big concert hall or a club, his rapport with the audience was established with music alone. Well, you know, he didn't talk, but he had a presence, and he moved when he played, but he didn't, you know, he didn't turn around and smile at the audience and say, right, he might have done that, but he wasn't in other words, the showmanship that he had was all in his music, and those wonderful introductions that he played to make you guess where he was going, and then he'd go into it and everybody recognized the tune would applaud. He was a marvel. He was absolutely unique. He was one of a kind in his music, in his person. He wasn't very verbal, but he was sharp. I got another glimpse of him when I was working on one of my less successful I may have mentioned that I worked in record stores. I worked at the Colony, which is a wonderful store in Broadway. So it wasn't bad. I needed to make some money. So Errol was one of the people, and very few, maybe one of two, who was allowed to go behind the counter where the records were on shelves, you know, and pick what he wanted. And he always knew what he wanted and what he was looking for. He didn't want any jazz records or anything. He wanted records where tunes were played correctly. So you pick up stuff like Percy Faith, you know, the other things that were called mood music at the time, because they were correct. He didn't read music. So he wanted to know what the tunes really were, not what somebody else's idea. And he would get a stack of those when he was going on the road. You know, he'd get a stack to take with him.
That's great. So one last thing to the television show. You mentioned a story about Don Byas.
Yeah. Well, Don had made his, comeback to the U.S., which wasn't to stay permanently, but he hadn't been for almost 20 years, and it was not a happy thing for him, because he didn't realize first that so many people who had known him still vaguely remembered him, but others never knew who he was, and others still had forgotten about him. I saw him, I think I mentioned that I saw him in Denmark when the Don Redman band, and he was the star, and he was in beautiful shape.
1946.
When he came here, one of the things he did the first time I saw him was at Newport. And I'm very fond of George Wein. We're friends, and I love George. He's, no matter what some people may say about him, and they don't anymore, but they say, George is a great man, and he did wonderful stuff. And he's a musician, and he understands a lot. But he didn't understand in this case. He had a tendency to push too much on one show. So Don's comeback at Newport was much too short. It was too short, and all of us were looking at each other thinking, should have had more time. There was a Dutch film. He lived in Holland for many years, and most of his time in Europe. There was a Dutch film crew who followed him around and stuff. He sat in with Thad Jones Mel Lewis at the Vanguard. I missed that, but I hear that was very good. And then, lo and behold, out of a clear blue sky, Art Blakey and Messengers had a Japanese tour lined up, and for some reason, I don't know who it was, whether it was Hank Mobley or somebody else, tenor player dropped out, and Art took Don to Japan. I don't know if anything, knowing what goes on in Japan in terms of just somebody must have done something to preserve this one. But that was unique. And then, he came to Chicago. I think that was before the Japanese thing. And we wanted him, and that was fine with him. He was glad to do it. He was glad to get the money. He wasn't that much in demand. He was working. He turned out to be somebody who was not very good at doing it the way we had people do it, in other words, not to tell him what to do. The only thing he asked us was, he said, I want to play an original of mine. He was using the rhythm section that he had in Chicago. He was playing at a club. We checked him out there, and he was fine. He said, can I announce the name of a tune? It's called Orgasm. I said, okay. He went, Orgasm. And he had this tenor, which is at the Institute now because his widow donated it. It had a snake octave key. The octave key had the head of a snake in it. And he was obviously talking about sex. Another thing he wanted was for us to hit him as hard as we could right here, where he was an exercise freak. He swam and he ran and he did all sorts of stuff. And he was of a certain age. He was very proud of the fact that he had this physique. I said, hit me. And I said, when I hit him, harder, he'd say, harder. Unfortunately, well, the thing turned out okay, but it really wasn't. It didn't end well because of his lack of, the time feel that Errol had so wonderfully. And we were a little disappointed. But what happened, perhaps the fates, the man upstairs or whatever, did that. The videotape of that is defective, and only a few minutes snippets here and there survive from it. So that's in part also Don's bad luck, because he should have been treated much better when he came back here. but he didn't have a proper management, and then George shortchanged him at Newport, and you know, he didn't get any record deals, and he went back. So that television thing, Bobby and Vic are wonderful. We couldn't bring in people. We got what was in Chicago. So we would have word of who was coming in, the people that we wanted. And Bobby and Vic came in, you know, and they had a gig at a small club, and it turned out to be a complete dud. Nobody came, but they had the TV show, so they liked that. But Bobby, there was a poster for the club show, and Harriet Choice, who is a dear friend and was very friendly with Vic, and Vic liked to keep his cooking utensils at a friend's house in whatever city he was likely to be at, because he would do his own cooking. He didn't want to, you know, if he stayed in a hotel, then you know. He was an excellent cook. I think we've talked about that. But anyway, there was this poster for the club. So Harriet got this poster. So Bobby took a red crayon, and in big letters he wrote "tilt" on the thing and underlined it. The show was wonderful. It exists. I wish I could show it to you.
Well, you don't have to, because it's in color. It's on YouTube. And when I've
Is it on YouTube? My God.
blogs about it, I've linked to it. So
Oh.
you have pleasant aesthetic homework at some point.
It's great when they do by Django,
Yeah.
and Vic puts his bell over Bobby's head. They were so good. We've talked about that. I think they were so close. It was a wonderful friendship and wonderful musical alliance. Who else do you want here?
Okay, well, right now I want both of us to breathe.